All right, so allegedly we are live. If anybody out there is hanging out in the comments, please comment to let me know that you're out there. I'll be pleased to hear from you. But hey, everybody, I'm Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I don't know anything about game manufacturing, so I brought in an expert. This is Ann Kenner. They are my colleague at Leader Games. And Ann, do you want to tell us what your official job position is?
Yeah.
What it means?
Yes. So I am the director of production and logistics at Leader Games. And that means that I am in charge of all our manufacturing for our games. And everything that has to do that. So that includes like quoting, R&D for componentry for new games. That includes all of our reprints for things that already exist. And also like safety testing and all sorts of that. So if it comes to making the physical game, that's in my zone. I also do I manage our localization printings with our language partners. And then I also do the logistics from our factories to then our warehouses in our different territories.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff.
That is a lot of stuff. Okay, so I mean, obviously we're here having this conversation because an absolutely bonkers quantity of tariffs have been placed on imports from China by our lovely orange overlord.
Yes.
And so I think the first question that most people ask is the question of why don't you just publish board games in the United States? Why do you do it in China? So this is a big question.
Yes.
But let's just dive in. Let's do it.
Yeah. So it is a big question. And the answer is so like complex. For so many different reasons. Like there are historical reasons why it's happening. There are like there's so many different reasons. But the biggest reason why you cannot just move the board game production that someone is currently doing to a US factory is literally that the ability to make the same product does not exist in the US. So, for example, at Leader, one of the games that we print the most is Root. And I could not make Root in the US currently without material that came from China. So I might be able to even make the product in the US, but I would still have to pay, like, there's no way that I would be able to get that material other than from China.
So what are the materials that we're talking about? I actually think it's important because these are everyday materials.
Yeah. And I would like to say that this is not either unique to our industry either. This is something that's going to affect tons of different industries, is where, okay, the product's made in the US, but a lot of the materials are not. And for us in board gaming, the biggest one is going to be plastics. Plastics production, and certainly plastics production on the scale and the intricacy that is required for things like, a minis game doesn't exist in the US, and it certainly doesn't exist at a price point that is doable for people to make board games. But that's also things like that includes like certain kinds of dice. So, if you're doing like injection molded dice, that's going to be more difficult. If you're doing things like metal coins, that's going to be very difficult. If you're doing other things like even things like punchboard, there are certain kinds of like more complex punchboard that US manufacturers just don't have the equipment to do. And it can range for all sorts of things. You want to do holographic card, like a Pokemon holographic card, there aren't going to be a lot of places that are able to do that for you.
Wait, really? Even the holographic cards?
Yeah, so there's certain kinds of things they'll be able to do, but certain kinds, especially like the masking that happens in like Pokemon cards, or if you're wanting to print on top of a holo foil, those are going to be more difficult. You might find people who can do it, but it also, and then that might be, okay, they can do it, but they're like an artisan studio. And if you're planning to like order, let's say 60K of these, well, you might have to wait 2 years.
Oh, God.
So it's not necessarily about like, okay, somebody might be able to do this, but their ability does not necessarily match what someone is capable of in China. So there's that as well.
Makes sense. And we talked a bit about cost, but
Yeah.
so what kind of cost differences are we talking about? Like if you're going to try to print, I guess even a card game in the United States, could you do that for comparable pricing?
Yeah, so I haven't priced anything in the US recently. But I would say that it probably ranges to like 5 to 10 times as much as it costs to print in China. Now, that obviously the what we would think the landed cost, so like the cost of what it takes to actually get a game to like its final destination, aka a warehouse, is probably much less from when you're actually shipping from one place in the US to the other. So that will decrease the overall landed cost of a game, but not enough. In fact, that 10%, if you were doing a simple card game and that card game retails for $15, well, let's say it was 98 cents in China. Well, now it's $10. So now you have a $5 margin, which is not a margin you want on a product of that kind. So, it's very different, and it's a much of a price difference that the tariffs that we're currently seeing, it still could be cheaper to print your game in China, even with the tariffs.
Okay. So
So like obviously there's a whole range of things that people of differences in board games, but there are certain ones where there's no way you would be able to make it here.
So, what about options outside of the United States? Like, I noticed there's a
Yeah.
bit of excited chatter on Blue Sky in the last couple of days about, oh, well, I heard from Longpack, and they said that they're going to they have
Yes.
a factory in Vietnam, and they're ready to print.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, I am getting so many emails about people who want to tell me about their factories in Vietnam. So, and which is true. A lot of Vietnam has been a someplace that people have had a rising interest in opening factories. There are some people who even have had factories in like the last couple of years. It's something you're seeing more of. People have been working to sort of diversify where printing happens for a little while. That's certainly been part of the conversation in the industry. But the thing about the Vietnamese printing is Vietnam is not a country that has had a lot of printing. Vietnam is, in terms of manufacturing, is really known for clothing. So it does not have the same expertise in the country. It also does not literally have the equipment. A lot of printing equipment is very large and very specialized, and so you not only need to have that equipment on like in like a large warehouse where you're going to have it as like set up for like a production line, but you also need the people who know how to use that equipment and who are skilled and who like have the project management experience and who have the communication experience. Another thing about Vietnam is also the ports. So where is your port in relation to your factory? Are those ports like set up to handle things like board games? Also, when you're thinking about producing in places like China and Vietnam, paper's greatest enemy is, of course, moisture. What does Vietnam have a lot of? Moisture. So that's also a consideration where it may be more difficult to do certain things that require a lot of paper drying. For example, like punchboard is one. Game boards are sort of the nemesis, as everybody wants a nice flat game board. Nobody wants a wobbly board, but you introduce some moisture into the process of making one at any point, and anytime that board goes somewhere else that has a different moisture level, it can warp even years later. So that's a big concern, and that is something that like then needs to be managed. But if you don't have the expertise, that's going to be something that you may see. So like there is going to be this rise, but it is also this like, how capable is that factory of giving you the same quality that you have come to expect? And that's not just as a publisher, but that's for our consumers. And it's the same problem that you have when you talk about US as well, because it's about the end product being what people expect, and that's not necessarily possible. Although I'm sure with the Vietnam factories that, as most of them are run by folks who are experienced in the market, that they will very quickly, if not already, are getting up to speed.
Nice. Okay, so we talked about, you mentioned expertise. So
Yes.
when you're talking about expertise in Olivier. Okay, so when we're talking about expertise, what range of expertise are we talking about? Because I remember you and I had like a casual chat the other day that actually made me want to have this conversation about how
Yeah.
even like printing on neoprene versus printing on cardstock requires different knowledge and like a different ability
Yes.
to work that equipment.
Correct. Well, like neoprene. So working with neoprene versus working, anytime you're working with different materials. So like paper, all paper is similar-ish, in that like you kind of, it has similar properties. And neoprene being a fabric is completely different, of course, and uses a completely different printing process. When you print on neoprene, it is a process called sublimation, which is completely different than the four color CMY. In publishing, generally use something called offset lithography, or digital for some things, and they're completely different. They like have no relationship to each other, basically, in the terms of like how you manage colors, how you deal with that in like expertise. And so, it's very different for those things. And when you're talking about expertise, that is something that like I very much rely on the people that I work with, who are so much more knowledgeable than I am, especially about the particular equipment that they're working with, and is invaluable, and also sort of a secret, the secret part of like the cost of a product, or the secret part of like choosing a factory. And like, even as someone, for me, I've been working in print for like 15 years now. And I'm also a print artist, so like I'm very nerdy about print. I know a lot about print, but there's still a lot of stuff that like I don't know about. Like, and stuff that like, plastics is something I've learned a lot about, but there's still a ton about plastics I don't know about. And there's still a ton about paper I'm sure I don't know about. And that there's a big reliance on that partnership with the factory in relying on their expertise. And when talking about like printing the US, that expertise just doesn't exist.
Yeah, the other thing I want to kind of circle back to is you talked about things not being the quality that
Yeah.
consumers and publishers here in the United States expect. When you say that, what is like a range of things that would fall under that comment?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is, which seems so small, but is so important, is actually cardstock. When you're thinking about like a card, for example, like I have right next to me, I have a Pokemon card, and there is a particular way. So there's a very particular stock that they use for these, and that stock is part of the feel of that card, and it is what makes that card feel a certain way. And this is the same with like Magic or like any other of the like TCGs, is that is so intrinsic to the feel of the card, to the way that and to like people will know, like just feeling a card, you'd be able to feel the difference for people like consumers or people who actually do these. And to I lost my light. To like not be able to like use the same core is a huge difference. And that is, of course, also if you have to match between an expansion and a base game, where you need to like mix the decks together. If those decks are not of the same exact stock, that can completely like change the feel of the game. And so that's a huge thing that our consumers don't know they're used to, but they are used to a very particular stock. And if you change it on them, they will notice. And let me tell you, people will tell you about it. They will email customer service so many times.
I'm really glad I don't work on that end of the office.
Yeah, I'm even offset from our customer service team. I've being in production, I never directly get the emails. I just get the sad walking into my office and them telling me about it, or I get the spreadsheet with like all the different complaints about things. But it's still very sad when it happens. But yeah, so there is that particular quality of like just and the basis level cardstock, and then of course for all other materials as well. So that could be like the cardboard that a game box is made of, like whether if that's thinner or thicker, and like its availability in that territory. Because there's a lot of stock. Stock can be very regional, like paper stock. For example, if you are working in Europe, you're going to be using stock, like European stock for the most part. And then of course there's Chinese paper stock. There's all sorts. Oh my God, there's so many different kinds of paper. And if you change those in any way, it will make the game feel different. It can make like the inks feel different. So you might have to do different color correcting for your printing to make sure that like a board that was nice and blue last time hasn't gone completely green or completely red. These are all the things that happen. It's not just as easy as like, oh, well, you just make it somewhere else. It's like that has become an entirely new product at that point, because it is using completely different material. So much so that like you could not submit the same safety testing. I would have to completely do new safety testing because it would be considered entirely new material.
Wow. Okay, I want to circle back to safety testing in a second, but Olivia has a question. Yes. Are all leader games using the same stock for the cards?
Yes. So we use the standard. So they don't all use the same stock because we use multiple manufacturers. So they're not exactly the same in you can buy like different brands of paper, but they have the same properties. So for example, our cards are generally 310 GSM, and that is the same across all of our games, at least as far as since I've been here. I think it's for all of them. Who knows about Fort, because I haven't done Fort. But that's generally true. So I also worked at FFG or I worked at Asmodee, but I mostly worked on FFG stuff. And like the cards for all of their like a lot of their games are all the same stock. And that's like to keep that same feel. It also like it can contribute to like the feel of a studio. So like obviously a studio that uses a heavier stock like we do, so like a 300 and above, that's a nice stock. If you're using more like a 250, that's a lot thinner. And so like that's gonna feel cheaper. That's gonna feel less nice. And depending on your game, that's going to be fine. Like, if you're doing Cards Against Humanity, you don't need to do a 310 GSM card. But it is, it is something in a leader that, like, we do try to keep that very similar. In fact, when I'm writing RFQs or requests for quotes, so like when we request pricing from a factory, and that means I have to give them like the specs. A lot of times I'm literally just copying and pasting from something old because I don't want to accidentally give them the wrong one. So I'll be like, okay, this is the stock we used for like this kind of thing last time. Then I'll just straight copy and paste
it. Makes sense. Okay, so safety testing. The other thing that I think I've seen a lot of comments kind of floating around about, oh, well, you should make higher quality American things. And like, we've already been talking about quality, but like not, in addition to China, like sort of being optimized to produce like high quality board games because of so many years of relationship with the factories, things that come to the United States are also safety tested. So what does that entail for a game like ours? Thank God we're not marketing to like tiny children.
Oh my God. No. That's why our games are 14 plus. Also because our games should be 14 plus. So yeah, safety testing is something that you have to do for all the different territories that you actually sell your game into. So we don't just safety test for US regulations, we also safety test for UK, because they left the EU, and EU regulations. So we generally test for all three. And that is not just for us, but that's also like for us selling it into different territories for like our distribution partners as well, so they don't have to worry about that. And that's something we have to, so that's something that actually our manufacturers will, I ask them to do that at the end, and then they arrange that for me for the most part. You can have safety testing done in the US. I've done that when I've found products in like a catalog that have needed that, or they haven't had it done, or there's a regulation changes, that also happens all the time, where regulations get updated and you're like, well, now I need to get this other test. So that happens, but safety testing is a big thing, and that's also making sure that the products that you're being made are going to pass that safety testing. There isn't anything that I've never had anything fail safety testing. So like it's not likely to happen, especially because most of our things are pretty most of the things in board games aren't that dangerous. The things that you're gonna get caught on are generally age grading things. And that's for like kids games. They're gonna have the most burden of that. If you're doing a game, like Root or Oath, which is designed for adults, is mostly paper products, and then is like, some wood and plastic that is not sharp at all. Although that's actually an age rating things too. Hey, you can have whatever you want that's sharp in a 14 plus game, I guess.
Bring back lawn darts.
Yeah, bring back lawn darts. This is my political stance from now on. Bring back lawn darts. But yeah, so it's not that big a deal for us, but certainly for other publishers that may make games for younger ages, especially, that's a much bigger deal for them. And it can be quite an expense as well.
So Amanda has a question. Which country has the most stringent testing requirements?
That's a good question. I would probably say that the EU does. The UK is also doing some stuff right now that is annoying. That's been a nightmare. But I would say probably the EU, and that's because they have a lot more requirements for some of the chemical and like flammability testing stuff. And that's also just like the EU tends to be a little bit more regulatory about chemical stuff, chemicals, than the US does, especially in like consumer products. So that's just a kind of a basic difference between like the US and the EU. But a lot of the testing is really standardized, so it's really easy to like ask a factory and be like, okay, what do I need? And then also it's by territory. So if you only ever plan to sell in the US, you don't have to do that other testing. But you better only ever want to sell in the US, because it can be a big problem if you try to be. You can actually have it stopped and not be able to be sold.
Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna put Tim's comment up here, but
yeah.
I actually want to ask a question regarding this. So he said that, I've long thought US consumers have become too alienated for the process of making, to your point. It's shown by the thinking that you can somehow magically just transport tools without the knowledge. So how long would it take if we were going to invest in manufacturing in the United States? Like, let's say that the money part isn't even the issue.
Yeah.
Even aside from it costing a lot, way more than people are willing to like absorb when buying.
Yes.
What would this involve?
Wow. So it would involve, so there's a couple different things that it would involve. First of all, it would involve, so there's all the tech, all the machinery. So that would have to come in, and guess where that would be coming from? From China. So that is where the bulk of those machines are. Some of those machines are incredibly specialized. Also, the ability to fix those machines, the manuals for those machines, which may only be available in Chinese, traditional or simplified, and neither of which I speak or read, and the replacement parts may not be available in the US. So if that ever breaks, you are going to be waiting 2 to 6 weeks, probably for that piece, because that piece might have to be machined. If it's specialty enough. So that's part of it. There's also the expertise, obviously, in those machines, which is not here. And it's not just the expertise in the machines themselves, but the process. So the actual process so one of the things that you can have made in the US, but is not up to the standard that I would expect most of the time from what I have seen, is punch board. So simple punch that you like punch the pieces out and throw away the skeleton, that is something that like most people don't think about. But let me tell you, when you see really, really crunchy, not great punch board, you'll notice. And I've seen it, and it's gross. It makes me sad inside. And like that's, making punch board is an art because it requires, as I said, paper is very sensitive to moisture. When you make punch board, you have to put glue on stuff, and that means moisture. And so you have to glue paper on both sides of a piece of chipboard, which is what the punch is made out of. And then you have to cut it, and you have to have very sharp knives, and you have to have people who know how to make those knives, because it's basically like you're making a cookie cutter. Every time they make those dies for a punch board, they're basically making little very sharp cookie cutters for all those little shapes. And then they're putting it on like a board and then pressing it down into the punch. And that's how you get punch. If that is not made well, if people don't know about how to do the tolerances well, if they don't know how to center that punch on the knife, if they don't know how to make sure that the front piece of paper and the back piece of paper are aligned correctly so that when you punch it out, the front piece and the back piece are both centered on both sides, that's all expertise. That's all has to do with learning that on the job, about knowing what that is, and then also having someone who teaches you that there. That's oh my gosh, please don't eat the punch board. At least if you do not tell me about it. And it has been safety tested. But not for human consumption. But yeah, so there's this so that's starting with literally just the machinery and sort of the people power behind that machinery, because that is one of the most important things that you can't import. You can't import experience. You can't import institutional knowledge. You can't do that. And it's also you need the warehouse space to do this. You need to live, you need to be able to have this place in a place that's by somewhere where you can get paper stock reasonably. You need to be somewhere where you can ship stuff pretty easily. So that means either by truck or by rail. So there's all that kind of stuff that goes into that. Obviously, if you have this, you're also going to need to have safety OSHA stuff in your own place. So that means you're going to have to know those kinds of things to start a warehouse or a building like this. And so that's all sort of experience that is very hard to just suddenly have. If someone today was okay, it's my goal that I'm going to start a new factory that's comparable to one of the best or better Chinese publishing factories or board game factories, I would say you would need at least 5 to 10 years.
Oh God.
You would need at least 5 to 10 years, and you would have to actually hire people as consultants to come in to do that.
So for context, I'm going to say it took me 6 years to do my doctoral program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's so much stuff, and that's not even getting into plastics.
Oh God.
Especially for minis. So the US does injection molding plastic, but minis are so complex, and they're so detailed, and they have really complex things like weird undercuts and all sorts of these things about how you actually form this piece together, and then if they're multi-parted and all that different stuff. And so that machinery is also very specialized. And then also the people sculptors and people who know how to look at this and know whether or not it can be made and all this different stuff. And then also you still would have the problem of, okay, so you've made this beautiful factory, but the infrastructure for the paper stock or the ABS plastic pellets or the glues for these things or the holographic film, if that doesn't exist in your space, it's the same problem, where you're still going to have to be going to China to get these materials.
That's wild to contemplate.
Yeah.
So just I don't know if you can answer this question. Maybe you can. I don't know if it's okay. So when you're paying for manufacturing in China, we're talking about the cost of importing materials. How much of the cost is the materials versus the labor? Is there any world where that would be worth it?
So generally, when I see pricing, I am seeing pricing that is material based. Mm-hmm. Depending on the factory, they will give it to me as itemized. So that means that each component has a price listed, or they'll give it to me where it's just like one big lump sum. I can usually ask for it itemized if I want to, but some factories are different about the way they automatically give it to you. However, that price is kind of a lie because it doesn't include the sort of intangibles of the relationship. So it doesn't include things like the time that my rep spends and answering all my emails. It doesn't be the time for pre-press stuff that someone does at the factory. So it includes these sort of like unnoted costs to it. Now, most of the time, like you pay for samples, you might pay upfront, or it might just be part of like the larger like fee that you pay, or sometimes we'll just roll it into some other like express costs in an invoice. But like you might pay for those, or it might seem like they're free. So like the price you see isn't necessarily a great reflection of like the real actual costs of things. I would love for a manufacturer to sit down and like talk to me about how they actually do pricing and all that stuff. But like I I know it's there, but I don't actually get to see it in pricing, unfortunately. So I don't have a good way to like to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean it's worth asking. Before I circle around to like another kind of topic, but like set of questions about working with Chinese factories. You know, other people have talked about, oh well, you could use Europe. There are factories in Europe.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess, kind of the situation if we were to print there, both in terms of cost, but also in terms of like the options for components that are available there?
Yeah, so Europe has a long-standing, especially like Germany and France have long-standing printing traditions. I mean, Germany is home to the Gutenberg press. I could talk about German printing forever. But have long-standing print traditions, so it's no surprise that often that German games and like French games and other games have been printed in their territories for a long time, and that has given those particular, especially in Germany, which is a huge gaming place, has given those consumers a specific sort of brand or specific expectations of what those games look like. Those expectations do not match what a US consumer would necessarily want out of we'll say, a non-Euro style game. So there's an expectation of like Euro style games that they might be in, like, you know, it's going to have a simple cardboard box. It's going to have like simple, fairly flimsy like rule sheets that are like folded. Maybe it's going to have maybe some punch, but it's not going to have a fancy tray. It's not going to have a lot of fancy plastics. It's not going to like have an organizer. You know, you're not going to get like really fancy chits or something like that. It's going to be more wood, more the things. And like, I like that style, but it's not the style of every game. And so the problem is there's kind of almost like a cultural difference that's happening there, where they're really good at that. And if you want that style of game, and if that's like your publisher style, in fact, like Root has a lot of similarities with those styles of games. Like that's a great place. That's a great option, but that's not going to work for everybody. That's not the only style of game that's out there. And so that's not going to be a valid choice for people, especially moving a product that already exists. It's far different if you're considering a new product and you're like, okay, I have these, you know, I have to go within these specifications, but you can't move a game that has a lot of plastics, or you can't move a game that has like special trays to just like a completely different manufacturer that doesn't necessarily have those capabilities.
Yeah. Kind of on that note, you're mentioning that you know, it's hard to transport like a game that's already been manufactured in one place to another.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we talk some more about that? Like, could you even get something like Root from one factory to a neighboring factory and have that be not a hot mess?
So in terms of like moving production from one factory to another, so moving the production of an existing product is one of the most annoying things that I've had to do as a production person. Because it basically means completely redoing the game. So it is like working on a new game. Because you have to give the new factory all the specs. You have to do all of the like what would be R&D in a new game, but now you have to like be okay, you have to take this piece and I need you to exactly match it. But this factory may not buy stock from the same place. They might not buy the same paper stock. It might not get their plastics from the same place. It might not have the exact same capability. Or like, it could be, hey, you had excuse me, you had done like a screen print on this thing before, but they can't screen print over here. Or, I mean, that's probably not going to be one. But for something that like some specialty thing, or like you have a silk screen, or like something like that, where one factory can do it and the other one can't. So that would either require that you change something, so you make a change like that, and that's not something you like to do unless you're doing like a new edition of a game in general. Or if you're doing like, or if you're doing it as part of like you can make those changes if it was like, for example, like Root has a plastic die in it, and like let's say that we change that to wood. That wouldn't be that weird for us because wood is a part of our stuff already, and people really like wood. But it would be a big change, and it would be something we would probably have to warn people about before they opened it up and were like, "What is this? Is this like a fraud copy? Like." Who put this wood dye in here? And so it's just such a hassle. And then I won't get into color issues because we could talk about that for like 3 hours. But like having to match color from printer to printer is incredibly difficult. And it's very time consuming because if I'm working in China or anywhere, there's a time difference. And I can't go there. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of back and forth. And it's just really difficult, and you're just trying to matching anything is just really, really hard, and it just takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it turns something that can be a simple reprint into basically having to do a whole new product.
So what I'm hearing is that even if we were to start printing new games in other places, ones that have been previously printed in China, it's not an easy transition.
No, not at all. Like it would be an incredible drain on my time, and also probably on graphic design's time as well. So that, I mean, it's a big deal. And it's also like there's also this funny thing where depending on how old the product is and how well documented that product was, so many little details can get lost in sort of the years, especially for products that were like done when a company was newer and maybe didn't have like the best processes or like the best like sort of paperwork upkeep. So sometimes you're like, I literally have no idea like what colors these are supposed to be. Like I know what colors they are now, but that might not necessarily be, colors can slip over time. And so like I don't know that anymore. And it's like, well, I can measure like the piece now, but the piece now is like that could also change a little bit because in manufacturing, there's always a little bit of a wiggle room. And that could be really difficult. Or like, okay, I know this is plastic, but I don't know which one. And so those little details can get lost. And those are the kind of things that like, the factory might have the institutional knowledge of this product, but this new factory doesn't.
Right.
And so that's another sort of like hidden little part of a product that you don't think about.
So on that note, Olivier wanted to know, and I think we can talk about this a bit, curious how this is affecting games in the pipeline, so like the Oath expansion. From what I understand, we are just going to continue and hope that by the time we send things to print, things aren't quite as crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like we're not ready for any of those like at the moment to like immediately hit print and go production. We're already working on those projects with the factory, but they haven't they become sort of a critical point in like our new projects where it kind of leaves creative zone, and then it kind of comes, instead of being like I'm not really involved in the beginning, and then once like the game becomes less of like a dream and an idea and becomes like more physical, then I get involved, and then I get more and more and more and more involved, and then eventually it just becomes mine. basically. Or it becomes like 90% mine, because I still rely on our creative team for, like, approvals. Does this look good? Is this what you wanted? Have all your dreams come true? But it ends up in my zone, and that we weren't close to that with either of them. So, it's kind of a hope by the time we get there that the tariffs will have hopefully come down, at least from where they are right now. But it's one of those things where it's kind of like, we plan to make these products, and we will.
And then a question, this might be difficult to measure right now. Is there any sense that Chinese manufacturers are panicking as much as stateside publishers are?
I can't speak to what they're feeling, but I can talk a little bit about what I've seen. I would say, and I have very good relationships with our manufacturers. The two main ones that we work with, I've been working with for like at least 4 years, if not longer, for some of them. So I know them really well, so we have good relationships. So there's been a lot of commiserating back and forth in emails, and like, people reaching out to me and doing that. And so they definitely know what's happening. Obviously, they work with a lot of U.S. companies, and I think that there is a lot of worry. I have certainly gotten lots of emails, as I said before, about people opening up factories in Vietnam and sort of alternate sort of strategies. I've also gotten emails about like strategies that factories are doing to like things that they might be able to help us with. And then also other things, like I've been getting so many logistics emails lately, which is the logistics company we work with, I love. So I'm like, no, we're not going anywhere. But yeah, so there's been a lot of the like chatter in my email of people like reaching out to me has really like been bumped up a notch. But so it definitely seems like there's stuff going on there, but it's hard because as a medium large publisher in the industry, we're probably a little bit more equipped than the much smaller and more independent firms to sort of work within the political space at the moment. So that's also, I think, that they we're not the ones that they're reaching out to as much, which in some ways is nice for me, but also doesn't make me feel great about other people and what they're going through.
Yeah. All right. So this kind of leads around to, I think, a harder question, and it's one I wanted to ask you because it comes up in comments all the time. Yeah. So let's be real. Like, the same people who don't think that minimum wage needs to go up in the United States are now kind of pulling maybe we should have become so dependent on cheap labor from people we're taking advantage of in other countries. Mm-hmm. So what's the economic reality of that business relationship with China? Like, yes, it's a lot cheaper to produce things over there, mm-hmm. but is that still a fair exchange?
Yeah. So it's such an interesting question. The larger question, not the stupid questions that people ask about this that aren't really questions and are just them saying nonsense. But it's a question that so much has to do with sort of the historical background of sort of manufacturing in the U.S. and also just generally in like how societies that like grow in terms of like individual, like how societies grow, and like through industrialization and through sort of manufacturing into sort of more higher wage and like technology based jobs. So this is something that happens, and like what happens is that once you sort of cross into this like higher level technology sort of and other jobs, people don't want to go back to working in a factory. People don't want to do industrial work. So like there's also this question of like you can see this in lots of different industries. It is difficult to hire people to do manufacturing in lots of different jobs that still do sort of small US based manufacturing. So so you can talk about it from that standpoint of like, people talk about like, oh, build up American manufacturing. Well, like it's not that easy, and there are like larger societal like historical movements that happened that made that happen in the US. And there's also the part that talks about Chinese workers. So, and that's the part that can get my hackles up, because it often, I think, is couched in terms which are often, I would say, quite racist against Chinese people and Asian people in general. And it's very, when you consider the fact that, like, people talk about, like, unskilled, like, slave labor and manufacturing in China, but they want to bring that same manufacturer to US workers. So are they unskilled? Or are they, skilled American manufacturing workers? Blue collar, salt of the earth people? Like, which one are they? Right. And so that's, like, the language that is used to talk about people who work in factories in China is often, like, really upsets me. That's also because I have been working with people in China for in doing board game manufacturing for 8 years now. I have been working with some of those people for, like, I think I've been working, like, for 8 years or for 6 years with, like, one of the people we finally got to meet last Gen Con, and it was so nice. And, like, that's my work colleague. Like, those are work colleagues of mine who are incredibly, like, skilled, who are talented, who are professionals in the same way that anyone who would be doing a job. They are the same as me. They are exactly the same. And when you even talk about people who are, if you're talking about people who are working in the factories, they are also very skilled. They are often very talented. Like, there are people there who know these machines. They know how to do these things. They are incredibly detail oriented in packing our games. That these are also, like, these are often people who are recontracted every year when the contract negotiation goes up. Also, high rates of women working in board game factories. So that's also something a lot of people don't know. But also, like, in terms of wages and other things, like, I can't speak to that. That's not a part of my relationship with them. But also, wages are different in different countries, as different countries have different economic, backgrounds or different economic situations. So, like, people getting paid differently in different countries is a reflection of that. Whether or not that's, like, good or bad or whatever, that's not a question I can answer. Sorry, I don't have the answer to geopolitics. But there are things that, like, people can do and people have done to make sure that factory work is safe for people. Part of that is safety certifications that factories can get. For example, there's something called the FAMA certification, which is family and something, I can't remember, sorry. But it is a Disney certification. Disney is actually one of the stricter certifications that can be done, and that is for any manufacturing partner who makes Disney merch, because obviously Disney does not want a scandal where you find out that your Frozen 2 doll is made with child labor. So that is one of the big things. Actually, FAMA's one of the big thing is child labor in that. So making sure that that's not happening, and making sure that, like, even workers that are younger, because of course different countries have different working ages regulations, are protected. It also has to do with safety protection. There's a bunch of different certifications. So someone, I think it's the BSI. And so there are all these different things, and, like, making sure a factory has those, making sure that it's workers. And part of that is also people coming back. So people coming back to a factory is something. So if people work there for a really long time, that's a great sign, because it means that, like, that job is work routine. Now, do we all work jobs that we don't necessarily love? Yes. Can I guarantee that everyone loves their job in a factory? No. But not everybody loves their job. That's just the way of the world. But I do think that a lot of there can be a sort of undercurrent in that conversation that devalues the expertise of the people of Chinese people who we work with in production, and that is really, really upsetting, and is quite frankly just not based in reality.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here is that we're not talking about unskilled labor at all. This is highly specialized work from people who have spent years developing their abilities in this area, getting certifications in this area, like evolving alongside our industry to help bring our products to market.
Yeah. And there certainly are areas, like in any manufacturing, where there's a level of skill. Obviously, somebody who's, doing a pack out, so putting the different components in a box, has a different skill level than someone who's like, running a press. But that's still a skill. Like that, being able to sit and pack out a bunch of boxes with different componencies for a game that is not in your language, that you have no idea what these things mean. Like, I don't know what these little bits of wood mean and like how they relate to each other. And I don't know if there's supposed to be 17 or 19 of them in this game, because most of the time they're like pre-packed. That's a skill too. That's very much a skill and should be, given just as much, respect as anything else, and as much respect as it would get if you were talking about somebody doing that in the US. Talking about bringing manufacturing, well, that's part of it. And if you're going to respect someone in the US for having a blue collar worker job and all that, like, pull up your bootstraps talk that people do, like, you have to then have that same respect for someone in another country who's doing that same exact work.
Yes. I also do want to point out, like, one thing that you and I aren't experts on this, but the fact is too, the exchange rates, like when we talk about salaries and payment, one of the reasons things in China are cheaper to manufacture is simply that sorry, my child.
It's like, please.
This is my life at work. I think about this, people who have traveled, I used to go to Egypt and be amazed at how far my dollar went.
Yeah.
But it was big money to the people that I was spending my money on. Yes. And it's simply in part an exchange rate matter. And so one of the issues with bringing manufacturing here to the United States, it's that we have to pay in a currency that doesn't go the same distance here as it does in another country. And like,
correct.
May that remain the same with our dollar kind of in flux right now.
Yeah, there is, there's a larger economic conversation that obviously comes a part of that. And it's one of those things where, like, we make product in a system. We're all part of a system, unfortunately. And like, the greater like exchange rate question is, a larger question about like capitalism and those kind of things, which we probably don't have time to talk about. But it is, that's part of it too. And that's certainly a part that like it should be talked about, but it's also like a very big question for a very small little board game industry. So it's not one that we are personally going to solve. Although the question is very important, and I think talking about the sort of economic realities of both like the dollar is like a power in the world and what that means, both historically and also what it will maybe mean in the future.
Yes. All right. So if anybody has any remaining questions, now's the time to ask. But just to kind of sum up, if we don't get any, no, we cannot just magically transport manufacturing to other countries. You can't even do that from factory to factory without significant consequences.
Yeah.
The labor that goes into board game manufacturing in China is incredibly specialized and done by people who are working in ways that we can't fathom without years of investment. And anything else?
Be nice to all your production people right now. All of our plans have been ruined. The day the first tariffs were announced, I had spent like an hour and a half that morning basically sitting down and planning out like our print numbers for the rest of the year on our scheduling for everything, which not only affects me, but affects like our finance team, our sales team, our graphics team, like having the bandwidth to do like changes and reprints and stuff like that. And yeah, so got to redo all of that. And also, but I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 months. So it'd be nice to manufacture stuff right now.
It would be nice to know.
We have no idea what we're doing. No, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Who knows?
And then here is a question: do you think more people will move more to card games?
I think I definitely think that if these tariffs exist for longer than like I would say 6 months, just because of how long it takes a game to like get through, like come to market from like the original iteration, I would say if they last more than 6 months, that we will definitely see a change in like what sorts of games get published, in terms of like complexity of componentry. So I think we will see a lot simpler games come to market, or designs that have been a lot more stripped down from what they might have been conceptually originally. I think people's asks in terms of what they want in a product will get a lot smaller. So I think it'll absolutely definitely have an effect on what sorts of games get published, and also what sorts of games like are popular, or what sorts of games sort of get bought by resellers and like distributors and stuff like that. Because also it's like, if you can manufacture in the US, then you might like you might be able to get a distribution, where if you print in China, you may not be able to go to distribution to like retain more of that
so on that
margin.
note,
so I think it'll definitely have an effect.
The follow-up was, do you think that publishers will not distribute to the US anymore?
So I don't really know, mostly because I have so little to do with our distribution channels. That is Clay, our sales director, or sales managers, sweet spot. So I don't really deal with that, but I can imagine that it's going to have an effect on the distribution there. The only thing is so I don't know how like tariffs. I don't know how tariffs affect like other company, like a UK company sending games here that were made in China. Like, I'd assume that still hits tariffs, but I don't know. I don't know if that's true, and so if that is true, like that will absolutely affect it. But if they don't get tariffs, then it would actually behoove them. And also, the US is a huge market for board games and tabletop RPGs. So like a lot of people in other countries, I've heard this before, are really worried because a lot of their customers are US based. We just have a lot of people who play board games. We have a lot of people, and a lot of them play board games. And so it's a huge market to sort of be closed off from distribution. But I think, yeah, some people are going to have to shut off distribution channels just because they can't make the numbers work with tariffs.
Yes. Sadly, that's a slightly bleak note to end on. I wish that I had something more hopeful. Maybe the news will change, but
maybe.
Let us hope, right?
I live in hope.
Look, we just got cut off from rare earth metals, and China isn't buying all the planes from Boeing that it was supposed to buy. Maybe we'll crack soon. We'll see.
We'll see.
But Anne, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about all of this, because I feel like there's just so many things that people don't know, including me. Like, I work at Leader now. I didn't know. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm so glad we ended up chatting about this at work, and you're like, well, let's come talk somewhere else too. And yeah, it's really fun. Like, I do love talking about this stuff, usually in happier times. But yeah, I think it's really important for people to know like how the production actually works, and like how sort of globalized it is, and how like, no product exists without globalization. And we are a very interconnected world, and even the little industry of board games connects to so many different places in the world, and that's both a good thing and currently sort of a bad thing.
You know what? I'm going to take this advice. We can end on all power to the worker.
Oh, all power to the worker.
Absolutely.
Every worker, everywhere, all across the world.
Thanks again, Anne. Thanks everybody for coming. And as usual, if you're watching this later, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.
Bye, folks.